Hello, guys. Welcome back to another episode of High School Sports Review, Week 2 on Sports Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Marlowe, with your co-host slash guest, Jeff Marlowe. And we are here to review Week 2, KV versus Wheeler. And that was a game that KV destroyed Wheeler. It was there was a running clock, basically from the third quarter on. Coming to the game, things to watch was Wheeler's passing game, Wheeler's defense, and their run game. And some things to watch for KV going into the game was their run, pass, and their offensive line. In the first half, it was a closer game than it was in the second half, obviously. And KV's passing game was especially better than what it has been in the past last week against the Rensselaer Bombers. What would you have to say about KV's passing game?
Going back to that week, KV's passing game was a little bit better than it had been in week one, but it was still not a strength of their game. They were still better when they were running the ball, and especially were able to get in, create some openings up front with their offensive line.
That's one thing I noticed about the run game. KV was opening up big holes on the O line, which would allow some of their running backs to get through there and get some big yards, and Wheeler wouldn't be able to figure out how to close up the holes of their linebackers. Which means a Browner point. What would you have to say about the KV run game?
I like the KV run game. Wheeler defense really didn't put up much of a resistance. I mean, it just was a real total mismatch up front on both sides, the offensive line for KV and the defensive line for KV on their side. But Parks, and I really liked the Castro kid that they came in with in the fourth quarter. So obviously I thought the run game for KV was strong, and it was all started with up front with the blocking.
I have to agree. That Castro kid I did like too, is because he was quick off the handoff. He was quick off the handoff, and he was able to find the holes and read the gaps, which one basically would shoot through. And I thought that was very important. What would you have to say? One thing I noticed about the Wheeler offensive line is they were not picking up the blitzes that KV is putting on them. What would you have to say about the Wheeler offensive line?
Well, they were, at least on that night, they were overmatched, and also I just didn't think they made any adjustments, and that came a little bit from the staff as well. That KV really was playing man on man outside, and they were basically cover zero, really no deep safety. So they were stacking the box pretty well against the offensive line and just bringing more numbers than KV could block, and than Wheeler could block, and Wheeler just never made any adjustments on it.
Yes, that's a very good point about that, because they weren't picking up the main blitzer, the transfer from North Newton. They were not picking up him. He had probably around 4 sacks in the first half, just because he was coming off that weak side, that blind side. Uh, let's see what, yeah. And then Wheeler's run game, they seemed to try and tried the run game a little more since the passing game wasn't working because they kept getting sacked. What would you see that you?
Well, there was nothing working for them in the run game or the passing game. Again, the offensive line was dominated by KV's defensive line. They tried to get outside a little bit, but there wasn't any place to go. They just didn't have enough hats to put on.
They tried to do on the run game, it just didn't work
to really create some consistent openings. And if I remember right, Wheeler really struggled to get first downs that night. I want to say they maybe only ended up with 2 or 3 first downs for the entire night, and it just right now, at least in that week in that game, Wheeler was not offensive line or defensive line was ready to match up with Wheeler, and it just showed throughout the course of the game.
Very, very true. Wheeler could not get anything inside the tackle boxes. Um, Wheeler's offense, they had a lot of penalties, which is a very big factor into one of the reasons why they lost so big. A lot of false starts. What do you think? How do you think you can fix all those penalties that they had? That just those simple false starts. How would you just go in a locker and tell them just
I
what
just
to
got to
do?
have better discipline, but that's just something you're going to have to fix. A lot of that's going to have to be fixed the next week in practice. But, that's all about timing. That's all about, I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the fact that KV was putting 8 and 9 guys in the box and was showing pressure. And so I think the offensive line was getting a little jumpy. And so, but that just comes down to simple, discipline. And I'm sure that the coaching staff emphasized that the next week in practice.
I think that would be a very big emphasis in practice, saying that most of their penalties all came from false starts and a couple personal fouls like face masks, which weren't the big deal. But Wheeler's discipline, like you said, wasn't very good, as they also had some muffled punts. Their play recognition, they would get too aggressive and would get beat on some of those go routes, those slants that the K was putting on. It appeared that Deerdorf was a main target for KV, but KV did not have a lot of speed to show in the run game, so their passing game kind of helped them get down the field a little bit faster. So what would you have to say about the pace of their passing game and just like how well it kept them ahead of the chains?
It got better as the game went along. The sophomore quarterback, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head, but the sophomore quarterback started to find his rhythm a little bit more in the from the second quarter on. But there's not a lot. It's not a highly sophisticated passing game for KV. That's not going to be their strength. They're going to be a pounded out, run it between the tackles quite a bit type team. But I thought it looked better as they got along, and it loosened up the Wheeler defense a little bit. But I don't think that was going to be the difference in the game overall. I just thought KV was going to win that battle up at the front of the line of scrimmage, and that was where the game was won and lost.
Yeah, I think a big emphasis on that game was the KV defense because they were able to put so much pressure on the Wheeler offense and just plow through their front seven.
I would agree.
In the second half, KV's running game started to get a little stopped, and that's when they put in the Castro kid, who was able to put a little bit more speed in there than the other guys. The other guys are more power backs, not a lot of speed, a lot more strength. So when they put the Castro kid in, how did you see the offense develop around him and kind of become a more of a open up holes and get out in front of him, get down the field than it did with the other two running backs that were more power backs?
Yeah, Castro has escapability. Castro has some moves that he has the ability to make guys miss. He has the ability to turn it up to the next level speed wise. And so I really think they've got something with Castro for the future. Now, how much they play him throughout the rest of this season will remain to be seen, I guess. But we will see them, I think, in week 6 or 7 with Lowell. But that's a kid I think that you look for in the future to carry quite a bit of the load for them. And he is a little bit different back than KV's had for the last few years. He has that ability, like I said, he can get to the next level, he can make guys miss, and he gives you that kind of breakaway threat once he gets into that level.
Yeah. I saw a lot of chances that he could have gotten some big runs, just got stopped by Wheeler's secondary. I know this isn't really something you're talking about, but KV's kicker had a pretty good leg. I want to say he had a couple of long field goals that you don't usually see in a high school game. Usually, you would like teams try around like the 35-yard mark. They will usually go for it. Maybe the 25-yard mark, they'll go for it. Don't let their kicker go out there. They'll go for it, and because it's the way statistics say, you have more of a chance of converting the fourth down than making the field goal. What would you have to say about the trust in KV's coach of their kicker?
Well, I think it's nice to see the high school staff have some trust in the kicker. And KV's had a decent kicking program the last few years. They had a kid who graduated last year who was really a weapon for them, who had a strong leg. The kid they have this year has showed that he had at least a decent enough leg to make him a threat offensively. That when you get inside the 35, 30-yard line, 25-yard line, you don't necessarily have to go for it on fourth down in a tight game. You can possibly, kick a field goal and then play field position from there on.
Yeah. So, so if you had a team that didn't have a decent kicker and in like a comes postseason time, playoff time, sectional time, whatever, they don't have a decent kicker against a team that does have a decent kicker. Who do you think would come out there? Like, do you think having a decent kicker really does improve your odds of winning, like just in total?
In general, yes, but I don't know about around in our area. I don't know if the coaches here have enough trust in the kickers overall. But but like I said, it's something that at least in the last few years, KV has had that threat, and this year the kids showed, at least in that game against Wheeler, that he's capable of knocking a couple through the uprights. And so I think that gives you an advantage. But again, I think a lot of high school football coaches don't. They always think of what can go wrong. There's too many. You gotta have good blocking up front. You gotta have a good snap, good hold, and then still make the kick. So I think they see more risk into it than they see positive. And so I think that's why they tend to either go for it or punt and really try to see if they can pin somebody back and play field position.
Yeah, I think that's very good points there, especially with the field position part, because like I said, a lot of coaches I feel like do look at what all can go wrong, and one of the things I think that they look at can go wrong most is usually the field position part, except for if they do miss it and it goes through, but it goes past the end zone, they do get at the 20-yard line, if I remember right.
Yeah, it's just a punt in a high school game. So it's no different. I should say it's no different than a punt. If you miss a field goal, it's not like the college game or the pro game where it comes back to the spot of the snap or the kick. It just goes back as long as it crosses. And if it doesn't cross the goal line, let's say you try a long one and it doesn't cross the goal line, it is in essence a punt. It is down to wherever it ends. So, and if it crosses the goal line, it comes back to the 20. So to me, there's a lot more. I see more of the upside of the opportunity for the field goal. But again, I just don't think high school coaches see it that way. They see too many variables that can go wrong, whether it's not blocking up front, the bad snap, the bad hold, whatever it may
be. Yeah, totally agree with everything you just said there, especially with the part where it basically becomes a punt. And if you do miss it and you get down at maybe possibly the 5-yard line, now you got them backed up in their own end zone. And I think it can help your defense out a lot, just being put down inside your putting team inside their own 5. I want to go back to the first half here. What did you think when Wheeler came out throwing basically the beginning of the game instead of trying to run first and maybe keeping KV on their
I think that's what they want to do. I think they want to throw the ball to begin with. I think they wanted to run kind of that pro style offense and do that. And the kid the week before had a decent week, not a great week, but he'd had a decent week. But like I said, it all started with the fact that they couldn't handle the KV defense and the amount of pressure that they brought. The kid from that had transferred in from North Newton, like you said earlier, I think he had 3 sacks in the first quarter, or at least 2 sacks and a couple pressures that really were, kind of the telltale. And Wheeler never did anything really to pick up that blitz from the corner and from the defensive back. So it really totally disrupted the passing game. But I think that's who they are. I think they want to be a passing team more than a running team.
Yeah, I kind of saw that too a little bit, especially seeing the pass wasn't working and they kept going back to it instead of trying the running game and seeing maybe they could keep KV on their toes a little bit by switching up the play calling. Wheeler's defense started to show some flashes in the second half, a little bit in the first half. They were finally able to get some stops later in the game. what did you see out of Wheeler's defense when they did get those stops against KV, and just like what they do differently the first times when they scored on them than when they got the stops pretty early in the drive?
Well, a couple of those stops came when KV actually tried to use a little bit of their passing game and didn't connect. But also, I'm not sure Wheeler really did a whole lot of stopping them. I think that KV hurt themselves a couple times with some penalties that got them behind the chains that forced some punts. But I didn't see, again, that was the one thing I was a little bit disappointed in. I did not see many adjustments on either side of the ball. And I just was really surprised that they weren't making more adjustments. But I'm sure that that was something they were going to work on as they went into the practice week.
So the KV side of things, what adjustments would you make on the KV side, especially on the offensive side? Because you already mentioned some things that you would adjust on the Wheeler side.
Well, I don't. There's not much adjustments. They're just going to get better at executing. And KV is going to be that pounded out team. That's Kirk Kennedy's kind of way he coaches. Pounded out, ground control game, mix in a little bit of pass here and there. I think they do have to get a little. Even though they played well against Wheeler, I think their offensive line has to play better and be more cohesive when they get into the conference season for them when they start playing Hobart and Andrean down the line there. So and Lowell. So I think that's where they've got to get a little better. And they got to pick up a little bit more in the passing game than what they were doing. And I didn't think Wheeler really challenged them on the defensive side in the passing game either. But that again, Kirk's going to try and run it as much as he can. He's going to try and pound it. They're going to run it 40, 45 times a game, mix in a few passes here and there.
Yeah, I think I do like sometimes KV's style of offense. It's a little bit more, I feel like, dynamic sometimes in other schools around here. Even though it's still running, I feel like they implement a little bit more some finesse or some trickery in there a little bit. Um, some of those trap plays. Um, that is all points out. You got any questions for me about what I saw or some things you or just a question you want us maybe a second opinion on?
Well, I just was curious if you were to kind of play out how good do you think KV is going to be down through the rest of the season?
I think they can be decent. I think they'll have some challenges against, like you said, Andrew and Hobart. I know Hobart's got a pretty good QB in Noah Ehrlich down there, up there, I should say. He's got some college looks. He's a sophomore, and I think that Hobart team can be pretty good, especially his senior year. Maybe even now they can be decent. Like I said, those schools up north I see that the KV usually plays, like Andran and Hobart. They have a lot more of a QB who can throw the ball, more pro style offense, which I think Andran's starting QB being out. But I think the big thing for QB did get hurt. I remember hearing, which who knows how that Andran KV game can go with their KV is against those teams. Can they stop the pass? Are their defensive backs fast enough or disciplined enough to stay man on man for 5-6 seconds, or maybe drop into a zone and make sure to cover all of the guys? Maybe don't miss a read, don't let a guy get in backfield. And then when you do stop that, are you able to come back and stop the run too on your front seven with your linebackers and your front seven? And because if those good teams, if they get in your secondary, you may have a better chance of scoring a touchdown than you did tackling them. That's because those teams are faster. They're on those turf fields. And Andrian in the past has been very good in their football program, and Hobart has been getting uptick in their football program too. What would you like to see out of maybe KV against a team like KV and Hobart with their a little bit different way they play defense than against Wheeler?
Well, again, their defense is going to be pretty much man up outside, cover zero with the safety, and I agree with you. I think it'll be interesting to see how they can match up with, especially a Hobart and Andrean or some of the athletes on the outside. Lowell's going to be a lot like like KV, they're not going to be as much of a throwing team. But Hobart and Andrean both have shown historically that they'll be willing to put it in the air a little bit more than Lowell will be. But that's a tough stretch for KV, and I think that's where you just find out a little bit about where they're at, where Kirk Kennedy has them, where their competitive spirit is. They play, I can't remember the order, but I think it's Lowell, Hobart, and Andrean pretty much back to back. It's 3 straight weeks. I can't remember the order, but I'll be interested to see how they match up with some of the athletes on the outside. And then also those schools tend to have, especially Andrean and Lowell, tend to have good offensive lines, excellent offensive lines, and see how their front seven can match up there as well. But I'll really be watching more about those battles on the outside. I agree with you about that. Yeah, I think they'll have to, but they'll be reluctant to do it. That's simply as you can put it. They won't want to. They won't want to, but they will eventually have to drop back into some type of too deep cover zone or too deep coverage, or at least some zone coverage.
Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. The Wi-Fi did go out. Um, so can you go back to what you were saying about just the
Oh, I,
KV defense?
they
About what
won't
they can.
want to go away from what they do, which is that mainly cover zero man up on the outside. But if they're getting beat, they're going to have to go back into some kind of too deep or some zone look to protect them a little bit, which means you'll end up taking away some of the numbers in the box. Um, as well. So, but they won't want to. Their philosophy is that they want to try and really dictate the coverage outside and be able to load up the box against the run. But you'll just have to see how it plays out. And that's why I said earlier I'm interested in really seeing those matchups on the outside and whether KV can match up on the outside with the likes of Hobart and Andrean. We really won't see Wheeler much more down the season. I would imagine at best they're going to be middle of the pack in the Greater South
Yeah, I
Shore.
totally agree with that.
They've
Is
already,
there anything
they've
else
lost
you
like
want
maybe one, I believe,
to
in
maybe
Wheeler
talk about
Forest,
in the future? Maybe
and
Wheeler's
then of course they
schedule, or
lost to
maybe a
Wheeler,
little bit
excuse me,
more of
KV in week 2. So
KV's
um,
just.
they- at best, I think they're middle of the pack, and we really won't see Wheeler the rest of the season. So, but I'm really kind of interested to see what KV does once they start conference play. And for them, the big thing is they have that tough 3 week stretch, but they've got to pick up wins against the Munster, Highland, and try to see and not get totally blasted during the conference to where they lose confidence going into the sectional play.
Alrighty. Yeah, I totally agree with Wheeler. They can't. If Wheeler can maybe just pull some games out and not get blasted, like you said, I think they can be decent in the middle of the pack in the Greatest Offshore. Is that
That's
all
all I
you
got for you.
got for me? That's all I had for you. So, uh, that's all for the KB Breather Sports Review, high school sports review on Sports Weekly Podcast. We aren't doing predictions since we are a little bit behind on the uploading. So I'm Daniel Marlowe, host, with my co-host here, Jeff Marlowe, and it's Sports Weekly.